Before we continue our work with translating some of those expressions from the our sheet that we decided what were variables and what were constants, we need to get a handle on operations and how we can read them in the real world. Remember, this is all part of mathematical modeling and using precise language, so that attending to precision as well. So we know some of our basic operations, and this is what I'm going to ask you to do. If you're in a classroom and your teacher has you do the activity with me, this is fantastic. If not, you can do it yourself. So what I want you to do on a large piece of paper, and hopefully in a mathematical journal, I can only hope. But what I want you to do is I want you to break your paper into about 4 quadrants here, and then we're going to have another little space for the last one because there's really 5 that I'm going to ask you to do. So what I want you to do at the top is put this symbol. At the left, I want this symbol. At the bottom, I want this one. And we want this. So we know I'm talking about add, subtract, multiply, divide. So we'll go ahead and just put that word under, since I gave you those ones to start with, and we know that that's what those symbols mean. And you know that we have been talking about different symbols for multiplication, and this is one of the last times we're going to be using the letter X for multiplication. I think you know why, now that we've been talking about variables, that this looks like the letter X, and we use letters for variables. So we might actually use a dot in the middle to represent multiplication. You might actually see a star like you would on a computer. And sometimes if you put 2 things right next to each other, we consider that multiplication as well. Not just 4 and 5, because that would look like 45, but if we did something like 4 and parenthesis 5, if you smush them together with parentheses like that, that means multiplication. And we're going to take some practice looking at that eventually as well. But this last one is division. So we have divide. And the 5th category I want you to either put on a separate page, you can put it on the next page if you want, is this symbol right here, or equal. Okay? So here's what I'm going to ask you to do, and if you're doing this in the classroom, I hope that your teacher is going to go along with these instructions. If not, you can do them at a table group, whatever you prefer. But it's really effective in the classroom to do some movement. What I would like you to do is, and teachers, if you are starting this in the classroom, what you need you need 5 stations, and the students will be eventually divided into 5 groups. At each station you need a pretty big piece of paper, and I like to use a nice size piece of construction paper, like I think it's the 12 by 18 or the 18 by 20 or whatever that one is. But I like the big construction paper. You can also use big posters if you'd prefer. But I like one that is labeled as add, one is labeled as subtract, etc., all the way down to equal. And even though students, you are going to be writing on your paper, you're also going to have one person from your group decide, when all of you have written something down, to write it on the poster as well. So for instance, once you get to your group of one of the 5 groups, if you will, I want you as a group to start brainstorming all the words or phrases that have to do with the station that you're at. So for instance, if you're at the add station, you want to start to think of any words that might mean add. Could it be more, plus? Some of those, go back to kindergarten. Anything you can think of that could tell someone that you might need to add a number. Okay, so I want you to generate some ideas together on it. Everybody writes on your paper, so everybody should write it down. And then one person from your group is going to write it on the poster. Okay, so you start off with add. When your teacher says you have about a 3-minute time limit on the first time, and then what we're going to do is we're going to move groups. So everybody in the add group is going to get up and go to subtract. Everyone subtracts going to go to divide, divide to multiply, multiply is going to go to equal, and equal is going to go to add. When you're at the new group, what you want to do is add any of the statements that the people have put on the poster already. You want to put that on your paper. If you disagree with one, that's fine. I would draw a line through it and just write disagree to the side. And don't necessarily erase it, but you don't have to put it on your paper until as a group you can come together. But you want to write down what the person on the poster had before you. Then you and your group members are going to generate any new ideas that you might have come up with. And you will write it not only on your paper, but on the poster as well. That's going to be about a 2 to 3 minute process. Then your teacher's going to move you again. Each time you'll realize that most people have come up with a lot of your words, but you may have something else. So I don't want you to think that by the end, your last few rotations, you aren't going to be able to add anything, because you probably could. So if I would have you do that, that would be awesome. We'll start at our first station. Remember, everybody writes, one person writes on the poster. Try to trade off that role. For the next set of directions, teachers, what I would like you to do is I would like you to find some textbooks that you might have in your classroom, or texts that you found online, and I would like you to let the students look through the words that your textbook have chosen to see what words they have put in for add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Usually you can find it in the chapter under expressions or translating expressions. If you need that, I will also have some lists up if you'd like to look at it. Now, your students may have a more comprehensive list than your textbook will, but sometimes the textbook thinks of words that you necessarily haven't. So it's a good idea to look through the text, and the people who are at this last group, when you're there, look through the text and see if there's any words in the text that are missing from the poster, and please add it to the poster and add it to your paper. Once that is done, everybody needs to get up and move to each station and make sure that your lists are complete with everybody else's. But this is the time to have those discussions about anything we might disagree about. Teachers, this last station, instead of having students move around, what you can do is you can bring up the 4 posters like I have here, and you could have them on the board and talk about the words and make sure everybody has them and what they might look like and if there's any disagreement. That's a really big help. Now we should be able to go back to our translating sheet and see if we can start turning some of those sentences into algebraic expressions using variables, constants, and operators like add, subtract, multiply, divide instead of the words. We take those expressions and translate them directly to algebra.